Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
John Bruni from Sage International is with us. John, are you well?
I am well, Jeremy. Happy New Year to you and to your audience.
And Happy New Year. Les Ellicus is with me, sitting by the dining room table. So if you hear another voice, it's him.
Okay, no worries.
How are you?
Not too bad.
We're playing tag team this morning.
Yeah.
It seems like.
Well, the more the merrier. If anyone would like to join us, but not while I'm talking to John, because we've only got the one line, 0491 65 68 60. There's plenty to talk about. What about this missile attack? Iran firing missiles at Pakistan, Pakistan firing missiles back. Aren't they both Islamic?
They are, and they're brotherly republics, if I can put it to you this way. I mean,
Well, they share a common border, don't they?
Well, they do, but they also have, even though one is Sunni and one's Shiite, they've actually had relatively good relations up until recently. But the one constant thorn in both countries' side is an ethnic group called the Baluch. And the Baluch come from a place called Baluchistan. And if your audience remembers the Kurdish controversy, where the notion of a Kurdish nation is ostensibly divided among many contemporary countries like Syria and Turkey and so on and so forth. The same kind of deal exists with the Baluch people. They're divided between the Afghans, the Iranians, and the Pakistanis. And like with the Kurds, the Baluchs on either side of whatever border they reside, and the majority of them do reside in Pakistan, are actually fighting an insurgency. They've been engaged in an insurgency in their respective areas now for about 75 years. It's a low-intensity war.
75 years?
75 years.
My God.
From about 1948, the armed resistance against their oppressor countries fired up. And again, in the very fast-moving environment that we see in the Middle East, it is very easy for people who don't know the subtleties of these conflicts and the complexities of these conflicts to draw a very simple line between, it's all Iran. Iran is trying to destabilize the region. Iran is going to go to war. We're going to have World War III, and it's all the Ayatollah's fault. A lot of the things that we're seeing in the Middle East right now, including the Baluchi insurrection, if you will, they're long-standing conflicts that are independent of whatever the United States is doing with Iran or Israel or Palestine. So we need to take a real deep breath and take a step back to observe the conflicts as they are, not as we wish them to be.
Yeah, or as they are reported. Because
yes, that's right.
This description you've just given me, I have not heard in any media at all before.
Yeah, well, that's the difference between, the mainstream media and actually understanding the local complexities. It is not what it appears to be. Now, you can grab a headline and try to, simplify a complex problem, which then can lead you to a not accurate conclusion.
Yeah.
I was on a virtual. If I sound a little bit discombobulated, I was up until 1 a.m. discussing this with a bunch of European strategists, all former NATO officials, and we were talking about the Houthi problem that we have in the Bab el Mandab, the strait that actually connects the Red Sea, the Suez Canal, and the Indian Ocean, which of course is now sort of
a war zone.
No, well, it's a war zone now, and many of the commercial ships from Asia to Europe that use the Suez Canal can't use the Suez Canal anymore because, it is a war zone. Insurance premiums have skyrocketed, and the risks associated to commercial shipping is very high. So what they've opted to do is go around South Africa through the Cape of Good Hope and up into Europe that way. But of course, that adds not only time to shipments
but
being
cost.
delivered to Europe, but also cost, yes. So we've got inflationary pressure. So a non-state actor like the Houthis in Yemen, I mean, the Houthis in Yemen are very much like Hamas. Hamas is a political and military organization without a country. The Houthis are a political and military organization in Yemen without a country. But, because of their location, they've got prime real estate to put strategic pressure on Western countries, which they are now exercising. And, the question is, how is Iran directly involved in fomenting this? Now, there are actually many analysts and commentators out there seeing the red right hand of Iran behind almost every move in the Middle East right now. And again, that is a very simplistic view. There are far more complex issues at stake here. The Houthis, again, like with the Baluchis in Iran and Afghanistan and Pakistan, they have their own long-standing independent feuds. The Houthis have been fighting a civil war in Yemen. They've resisted Saudi intervention from 2015. They have a lot of animus among various groups inside the Arabian Peninsula. These issues predate what we understand. When we see the war, we see it from today's standpoint. We don't look at the ancient or long-standing issues that had, made these areas particularly unstable for a long period of time.
Why didn't we send a warship, John, to the Red Sea? Well, some story about it not being our backyard and we've got more important things to do in our...
Well, Jeremy, I think that the Albanese government's strategic and international relations policy is rubbish. And the reason why I say that is, at the moment, if we can't send a frigate and support that frigate in order to...
It's symbolic, isn't it, really?
Well, it's not even that. We are a trading nation. That supply route from East Asia to Europe is critically important for some Australian exports and imports to come through as well. And the fact that we are an international trading state with a high-tech navy and we can't deploy one vessel, not one vessel. I mean, does this say something about Albanese's weakness or skittishness of getting involved in a much wider conflict in the Middle East, were that to take place? Or does it say something about the Royal Australian Navy and its inability to field a fully crewed warship?
What do you think? What do you think? Which is it?
Well, I suspect that it's about us not being able to fully crew a warship. So I think that there are far more significant issues with the Royal Australian Navy than we want to give credit for, and Albanese probably is right in saying that we shouldn't send a ship because we can't send a ship, but that still signifies extraordinary weakness by Australia. And it's something that we were discussing last night in that conference. And, I did raise the fact that, because we were talking about Europe's response, and Europe's response has been particularly weak. And, we're talking about a collective of countries that has aircraft carriers. I mean, you look at the Spanish, you look at the Italians, both countries have, admittedly, small aircraft carriers, but they are aircraft carriers. You look at the Brits, they've got two quite large aircraft carriers. You look at the French, they've got aircraft carriers. And yet what came up from one of my European colleagues is that the Europeans' weak response to the Houthis is based on the fact that in the UK, for instance, they've got two large aircraft carriers. None of them can be crewed. So we're really looking at a fundamental weakness in Western strategy that we have allowed to happen on our watch over the last 25 years. We took our eye off the ball. We all have small defense forces these days. We paid the peace dividend on the one side. We also bought into that technology will beat everything mentality, which means that we're quite happy to spend billions of dollars on one or two warships or a handful of aircraft or maybe a handful of tanks. because we think that one tank can defeat, 100 other tanks of modest technology, which of course is a false economy. It's rubbish. You need to have quantity as well as quality. And look, defence industry, I hate to say it, it's a corrupt enterprise. You're really faced between now two forms of corruption in defence industry. You've got the corruption of the countries like China and Russia, which is dysfunctional corruption, and then you have functional corruption in the West, where a nut or a bolt that goes into an aircraft can cost anywhere up to $500 or $1,000, depending on where that nut happens to be. There's nothing particularly special about the nut. It's not an over-engineered nut, but we're skimming off the top. And guess what? Countries can't afford the weapons that they need to defend their respective states and national interests.
But ironically, John, we've got our Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, in the region at the moment, and now she's amassed a further donation to the people of Gaza of now $46 million. And who can for one moment say that will be 100% to humanitarian requirements, or will it go to Hamas and to build a further extension to what I understood last night from Sky News, 500 kilometres of underground tunnels in that region. And this is the problem that the Israelis are finding, that that's not only Australia but other countries around the world are financing Hamas to fight against Israel. And that leads me to a question to ask you is, wouldn't it be far better in the context if we have a neighbour in our own street and we can't get along with that neighbour, there's two options. You either put up with it in harmony, or you sell up and move to another place. Now, isn't a good proposition that the people of Gaza could be relocated to another region, maybe Africa, somewhere in Africa, because they'll never be friends, John? And that'd be a question for you. Can this ever be reconciled and resolved?
Well, that certainly is an interesting prospect. But again, if we look at what you've just said, this is exactly the same thing that we were talking about the Jews prior to the foundation of Israel. We've got a stateless people. There are too many political sensitivities about finding them a home anywhere. But Africa looks nice. Why not Africa? And then if it was Africa, what about the local indigenes there? I mean, well, what do you do with the native people in, say, I don't know, if you want to put them in Uganda, for instance? That part of Uganda will be then flooded with Palestinian migrants, and that will lead to all sorts of internal security problems for the Ugandan state. And this is just a hypothetical, of course. But again, if you're looking at this, we've been down this sort of thought bubble before, and it was rejected outright, pretty much for the reasons that I've just said. So, but you do raise that issue about what to do with two people who obviously can't, for deeply held political reasons, live next to each other. Now, I've always suspected since this war commenced that, again, like what I was saying earlier, much of what we're seeing is not really what's happening. There is a deeper subtext to this. And I think that the deeper subtext that we're seeing with the Hamas attack and the Israeli response is that now it seems to be playing into the hands of right-wing Israeli politicians to do what they've always wanted to do, and that is put the final squeeze on remnant Palestinian communities. North of Gaza has been completely demolished and flattened. Now, Gaza is not a very large territory, and it has a population of 2.3 million. About half of the population now is internally displaced. Neighboring states like Egypt are not friendly disposed towards the Palestinians of Gaza because they all believe that Hamas and people who are associated with Hamas represent a form of Islam that they're just not comfortable with. And that form of Islam is called the Muslim Brothers. And the Egyptian authorities have had their own experience with Muslim Brothers, and they don't like it. So they're quite happy to block the southern border of Gaza, effectively trapping the Palestinian people. So the Palestinian people actually have their backs to the sea. They're internally displaced, and they have no homes to return to. Now, what possible outcome do we have here? Well, I would suspect that from a strategic perspective, if you look at Israel itself is a very narrow country with a very narrow waist. I think the waist is probably about only 50 kilometers wide. Now, it would be in Israel's strategic interest to try to increase the amount of territory directly under the control of the Israeli government, widening the strategic depth that that country has. If, for instance, the Palestinian community, by some, well, we don't know what the magic formula is going to be, but say the Saudis come in with an economic aid package for the Egyptians, and they say to El Sisi in Cairo, look, mate, we understand your problem with the Muslim Brotherhood, but the Sinai is a pretty empty desert, and if we give you a few lazy $1 billion, why don't you let the Palestinians set up permanent refugee camps in that area? And we'll just keep on pumping Cairo with as much money as possible, just so you guys are reasonably happy and content, and your country doesn't fall over as a consequence of this. Now, if that's the case, and most of the Palestinians pack up stumps and leave, either because there are no homes to return to, or they don't have any other option, then you have to wonder what is going to happen with remnant Palestinian communities in the West Bank once the Gazans have been taken care of. And this is my biggest fear, because, of course, Jewish settlements in the West Bank have steadily eroded anything Palestinian about the West Bank. I mean, the Palestinian communities, and I use that term very openly, there is no Palestinian nation, but the Israelis have cleverly used roads, Jewish-only roads, checkpoints, to basically checker the West Bank in such a way that the Palestinians can't have anything that's unified against Israel. It will only be a matter of time before, once Gaza is settled, Tel Aviv will then start putting its full weight behind expanding and further taking more Palestinian land away, which will make absolutely impossible the notion of a Palestinian state now or into the future. And then what happens to those Palestinians? Well, they'll probably end up in Jordan. And if they end up in Jordan as refugees, 70% of Jordan is basically made up of Palestinian refugees from all the Arab-Israeli wars in the past. And that has not necessarily been a great formula for stability within Jordan. There have been times where Palestinians have risen up within Jordan and caused major national security headaches for the Jordanian authorities.
Something completely different, John. Will Trump end up being the next president of the United States?
Oh, boy, Jeremy, my thoughts on this, I hope not. I suspect he will.
What a saga. What a saga. I mean, it's an amazing story. Only in America, I think, is the expression you could use.
Yeah. Look, I agree with you on that. Look, the only thing that stands between Trump and the White House at the moment, because he has got a head of steam that one can't deny, the only thing that's standing between him and the White House now is a jail term. But again, the American system is so bizarre and peculiar. I think that there are enough loopholes for Trump to serve as president from behind bars.
What a television show that would be.
The Apprentice meets, I don't know.
Oh, yeah. He'd be up for it too, I'm sure.
Oh, no doubt. The first a convicted US president sitting in prison with the nuclear football and giving orders to run a country. I mean, it sounds bizarre, but as you say, only in America. And I think, that's a problem.
Yeah.
John, not making a political statement and picking sides, but under Trump, there were no major world conflicts. And even when Kim Jong-un in North Korea threatened, Trump said his button on his desk was a bigger button and you push yours and see what happens. Under Biden, we've had nothing but strife. What's your view on that?
Biden is a weak president in the same mold as a former president, Barack Obama. Barack Obama was not a strong man. People keep on saying what a wonderful, articulate orator he was. And yes, he was all of that. But in terms of being a grade A number one president, he was a bit of a douche or dick or whatever you want to call him. I mean, I must say that I was extraordinary.
Why don't you tell us what you really think?
Well, okay. Well, let's put it this way. We get all very huffy, when someone with grandiose ideas, plans, and a nice way of speaking, presents themselves. Like, oh, my God, they're so clever. Oh, they're wonderful. But if you looked at all the things that Obama had done in his foreign policy term, they were less than stellar. And, you know, there was the pivot to Asia issue, which never came about because he got redistracted by the Middle East and the war on terror. There was the red line in Syria, which never came about. No, you can't use chemical weapons, Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons. What are you going to do about it? America did nothing. And, you know, it set a precedent for dictators to do really terrible things and get away with it. So if you think that Obama's foreign policy was great, I think it's a bit of a delusional subject matter. But similarly with Trump, I don't see anything from the Trump foreign policy or strategic policy that netted us anything. Was Trump lucky during the time that he was in power? Absolutely. But I will put one thing to you. What did the North Korean outreach actually achieve? Did it achieve peace? No. Was there a state of peace prior to Trump reaching out? It was a tense peace, but it worked. Would it have continued working without Trump? Pretty much. You leave the North Koreans alone, they'll just keep on firing rockets and making noise, but they're not going to do anything because if they declare war, their regime, the Kim regime, will be exterminated. It will be taken out completely. Let's not underestimate the military power surrounding them in South Korea, Japan, as well as the American presence in those two countries. It is significant. So, you know, I mean, it's not going to be a rerun of 1950 to 53.
No, but you can't keep drawing lines in the sand and having people step across without eventually having to do something. Otherwise, you paint yourself as totally impotent or a coward.
Well, yes, and this is where Biden's foreign policy problems are. You know, he's scrambling around at the moment trying to do something with Houthis, but you know, airstrikes and missile strikes alone do not make a lick of difference to an organization that is so highly decentralized and has many of their missiles and drones on mobile launches, which are notoriously difficult, even in the modern day with satellite intelligence. It's very difficult to track mobile launches because they can be hidden. They can be hidden in villages. They can be hidden underground. They can be hidden all over the place. They fire and then they go. They don't stay there. They're not static areas. So, again, you know, yes, it's nice that, the Combined Task Force 153, the Eisenhower-led group that's protecting international shipping out there is there doing what it's doing. But what it's doing is really just, you know, well, what did Donald Rumsfeld say about when they ran out of targets in Afghanistan? Or we're just bombing mud huts or something like that. And that's effectively what we're now doing in Yemen after we've taken out, quote unquote, known radar sites, known command and control posts, known static sites. They're still managing to fire off missiles at commercial shipping. So unless you put boots on the ground in Yemen and root the Houthis out, and there's an argument for it, and there's also a very clear argument against it, you're not going to accomplish anything with airstrikes alone.
Well, if Trump was to become the next president of the United States, where does that leave AUKUS? Do you reckon he would go along with that and our submarines, or would he cancel the whole deal?
Look, it's always, with Trump, follow the yellow brick road. He has said right from the get-go, right from 2017, he's all about America first. Now, think about it from a Trump perspective.
I don't blame him. I don't blame him.
All right. So we Australians want to have America's top nuclear submarine, the Virginia class. American shipyards are suboptimal currently because they don't have enough skilled personnel to fulfill modernization orders for the U.S. Navy. So the U.S. shipyards are under the pump. But Trump will want to keep as many American jobs in America. What the AUKUS deal requires is that, you know, a sub-branch of U.S. naval shipbuilding take place in Adelaide, and that would effectively mean that many American jobs are going to have to be relocated to South Australia. Now, some of those jobs will go to Americans. Many of those jobs, hopefully, will go to South Australians. And that means that there will be far fewer Americans working on submarines. And I think that if I was Trump, I'd say, screw AUKUS. What's AUKUS all about? I mean, hell, if Trump is quite open about wanting to walk away from NATO, effectively the alliance that has kept major war away from Europe, well, up until February 2022, for a long period of time, AUKUS, which was just a Biden thought bubble in 2021, you know, what's the point? I mean, the ink is barely dry on a piece of paper. They can tear that up once the new president comes in without blinking an eye. And what will Australia do? We'll just accept it because the Americans have told us. That's it.
By the way, with regard to the submarines, we're getting 8. That's the plan, is it not?
Well, the numbers will go up and down depending on budgetary pressures. Now, at the moment, we've got a technical order, and I use that in parentheses, for 3 Virginia-class submarines, which will cost somewhere around, in current dollars, $173 billion. Now, let's translate that into language that most people will understand. What's the return on investment here? The return on investment in a general peacetime environment would be that of the 3 submarines, 1 will be in the water, 1 will be being refitted for the next mission, and 1 will be in deep maintenance. So effectively, for $173 billion, we get 1 crewed submarine in the water. And because we haven't been able to fully crew the Collins-class fleet, and we have 6 of those with crews of 40 to 43, right? We haven't been able to fully crew that submarine service. With a much larger nuclear-powered submarine, where 1 submarine has a crew of about 120, and you need about 4 crews per boat so they can cycle through relatively quickly. Where are we getting the people from? Oh, what are we getting them from? Afghanistan? Are we getting them from Egypt? Where are we getting them?
John, are you telling me they haven't thought this through, they're not smart enough, or they're just plain stupid?
Yes, all of the above. They haven't thought it through, and they're plain stupid. And look, I think that many policymakers think that so long as they're seen to be doing the right thing by Australian national security, that's good enough, mate. She'll be right. It'll be all right.
Now, how much do you reckon, question without notice, I mean, you've given us a figure there, but how much is each submarine? What would each submarine cost?
About 30 billion a pop.
30 billion.
Yeah, and that would be the whole, inclusive of supply, support, maintenance, and all the other bits and pieces. Now,
okay, but it doesn't add up, John. It doesn't add up because they've told us, well, this whole thing's going to cost us $368 billion. But if you take, let's say, 8 submarines and multiply that by 30, it doesn't come anywhere near $368 billion.
Now, Jeremy, I've got to haul you over the coals for this. We can't mix metaphors here because AUKUS Pillar 1, the initial phase will be for the 3 to 5 Virginia-class submarines from the United States.
Yeah.
In the long term, and we're talking many, many years later, we're going to get 8 AUKUS-class nuclear-powered submarines. And that will also bring in the British shipbuilding industry. And if your listeners know anything about the Royal Navy and the parlour state of the Royal Navy now and UK shipbuilding, we may all very well question whether the UK has any meaningful role in the creation of the AUKUS-class submarine as yet to be designed and fielded. So we've got major problems here. I mean, this is like a wish list. Yes, we want to have a nuclear-powered submarine. We'll buy an existing model from the United States now, and then in the future, we will buy a model that has not even been designed yet for future operations. Great. How are the British, American, and Australian shipyards all going to work seamlessly together when each country has different requirements, different levels of defence industry? I mean, Australia basically has to import most of everything anyway from a technical perspective because we've got no industry here.
Yeah.
So, if it doesn't come from the US, well, that's it.
But John, I understand the reasons why nuclear is going to be, or nuclear propelled is better than fossil fuel propelled. But what about, and for the listeners' benefit and our benefit, the things that go bang, the real deterrent factor? I mean, it's all very well to say we've got nuclear-powered submarines, but that's like saying we've got a nuclear-powered washing machine. It's not going to do anything except wash clothes. Now, will these submarines have any deterrent effect, or are they just window dressing?
That's a good question, and frankly, there's no easy answer here, because it's not that we're buying 3 to 5 submarines now and maybe 8 in the future. That is the thing that needs to focus our minds. We have to think, what is the threat doing at the moment? So our threat is the People's Republic of China. They are undergoing a historic and massive expansion of their naval capabilities. They're building submarines hand over fist, including nuclear-powered submarines. They're building surface warships. And as far as we understand, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that these things that are rolling off Chinese shipyards are fantastic quality, fully crewed, absolutely ready to hit the water and do damage to America, Australia, and every other contending power in the Western Pacific. But but the numbers say something about what the Chinese are prepared to do to invest in. So what are eight nuclear-powered submarines where Australia possibly won't be able to crew all of them? So we'll have multinational crews serving in those boats, effectively under an American command, which means that effectively we would be part of an American-led submarine service with an Australian kangaroo stamped on the conning tower. I mean, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure whether anything has been clearly thought out.
No.
Now, there is another thing about AUKUS, though, and of course, for that, we have to understand the nature of AUKUS in its totality. AUKUS is both a submarine construction program as well as a program of trilateral support in a whole bunch of other areas for Australia, the UK, and the United States. And here we're talking about the building of missiles, hypersonics, cooperation in cyberspace, and various other blue sky and high-tech industries. And even more closer cooperation on intelligence matters. So in many ways, it is AUKUS Pillar 2, the non-submarine aspect of the arrangement, which probably will survive the submarine aspect. I think the submarine aspect is almost a stalking horse for something far deeper in terms of the Anglophone relationship that AUKUS represents in the in our part of the world, in the Indo-Pacific. So if you look at it from that perspective, perhaps you can see that, yeah, this is a good idea, minus the submarines, because the submarines look like a disaster about to hit us, and they probably will from an organizational perspective, because how can you put a nuclear industry on this country that is technically anti-nuclear, even for civilian power? I mean, we still have the lefties swinging from their chandeliers and they're beating their green little chests, saying, "Oh no, if it's not wind power and if it's not solar, we don't want it."
A wind-powered submarine. Now that's something. I'd like to see that. That would be good.
It would be, yeah. And I think that that's where we're heading, because our policy making elite is, it's a bit of a wasteland in Canberra at the moment, and I don't know what happened to the adults in the room, but they seem to have left the building with elders.
Yeah, but wouldn't it be, I don't know, the completion date or the anticipated arrival date of these submarines, but, the vast majority of them are probably going to be obsolete, because how far away are we from artificial intelligence controlled, automated submarines and ships and boats and stuff?
Oh, we're already there. I mean, we've already got vessels, remote-controlled vessels, both surface vessels as well as submersible vessels that are being deployed as we speak. And that raises an interesting question. In an age of robotics and AI and machine learning, why are we still looking at manned submarines doing very dangerous and dirty work when we can have a machine do exactly that?
Yeah, that could be a sensible use for AI, wouldn't it?
Well, it would, but again, we don't live in the Jetsons age. We've got Jetsons aspirations, but we don't live in that age where factories are run by machines. We don't live in the Terminator endpoint where robots build robots. And until we get to that point, we're still dependent on human labour.
Listen, thank you for all your time. You're very generous with your time. Can I ask you one more question about these Taipan helicopters? Not without controversy, I suppose. I'm not sure how many of them we have, but I've got a story here that says that very quietly the government is going to replace them with Black Hawks, which were the helicopters that the Taipan replaced, I believe. But the thing is that they're going to cut up the Taipan helicopters and quietly bury them.
Yeah,
have you heard this?
I have, and my honestly, it's another one of those defence nightmares that gets my blood boiling, Jeremy, because These are helicopters that we haven't been able to master, but the Europeans certainly have. Now, if there are technical issues with these helicopters and we don't see it fit for purpose anymore, that's fine. But there is a country called Ukraine.
I did. I said that this morning. I mean, why, they're crying out for equipment, aren't they?
They are. And look, it's a risk for the Ukrainians to accept anything that the Australians reject. But if the Ukrainians have the will necessary to do whatever they need to do from a technical perspective to get those helicopters back in the air for operational use, the risk is then on them. And I think that it is a great waste. But then this is the Australian way in defence acquisition. Jeremy, I wrote the book on Australian acquisition. Everything that I said about the patterns of defence acquisition from our first wave of major modernisation in 1963 still have yet to be addressed in 2024. Yeah. That is a problem. And the Australian taxpayer ought to be bloody angry. And the Australian taxpayer ought to be taking our policymakers out to lunch and telling them no more money until you start fixing the goddamn system.
Yeah, well, how many white papers have we had on defence? I mean, when was the DIB report? I mean, God, they've looked at it and looked at it and looked at it, and whatever happens to these reports, God only knows.
They get shelved, they go into the libraries.
Yeah, big office full of manila folders that nobody ever looks at.
Yeah. They gather dust and cobwebs. And the problem with Australian defence acquisition, as with many aspects of defence, is that we have a very small manpower base, administratively and from a soldier, sailor, airman perspective. Also, it's extraordinarily top-heavy. Too many generals and admirals and air vice marshals and air marshals for such a small force. So we're top-heavy. We don't have enough ratings and other ranks to run the machinery because we have constant personnel and manning problems. We don't have enough skilled people to run defence industry because, it's not like opening up the Snowy Mountain scheme or a scheme like that where you can use unskilled or semi-skilled labour.
Yeah.
You've got to be of a certain technical bent to be able to get into defence industry now, and that takes years of training. And your mastery of English in a technical level has to be pretty bloody good because you don't want to be messing around on a weapon system when you don't know what the hell bolt goes into what hole. You've got to really work this thing out because it's a very precise kind of industry. Now, how are we going to solve all these problems? Well, we've let these problems basically just fester. It's metastasized now. It's all part of the defence machinery here in Australia. And I would argue that it's a contagion. It is the national security international contagion. It's the national security COVID, if you will. Every Western country has similar problems, just on a different scale, because, of course, Australia is a small country. But if you look at Germany, they haven't been able to get up to 2% of GDP. They are suffering from lack of manpower, lack of personnel, lack of skills in the defence industry base. And they're now starting to realise, the Russians, they're still causing major problems for almost 3 years. Yeah. We may have to do something about it. It's going to take them 25 years to fix their problems if a government consistently applies the solution. Right?
Yeah. But I guess, John, that's the reason you're probably supporting that Australia, who has friends around the planet, and there's a synergy between like-minded countries that we support each other, form a coalition so we can help each other, support each other, have our measures to control our coastlines with various joint activities. Whereas, by contrast, if you look at China, what they're doing with their Belt and Road project, looking for deep water ports around the planet so they can move their military boats there, long runway so they can land their planes, so they've got access to other parts of the world from their own country, which is, again, I think, a significant strategic move by them, which is very, very difficult for us to compete against because we're not a military nation by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah,
yes.
Well,
yes.
no end of problems. But if we can send bushmasters to Ukraine, I can't see why we can't send these helicopters that it would be a far better use for them if we don't want them than cutting them up and burying them. It's, to me, extraordinary. When there are countries that still have the Taipan in service, and I don't hear of any complaints or problems with them.
Indeed, indeed. The taipans that we received was really our problem, and there are many ways that you can look at this. I mean, that is, there are two groups of people in Australian defence. Those who want to diversify the weapons imports away from the United States, so we have a more heterogeneous military platform pool to draw from, and those who just want to standardize everything to the United States and not worry about getting stuff from other places because they don't feel they believe the Americans will never abandon us. Now, this is a perpetual war within defense, and you've got good points and bad points on both sides. But getting back to the point raised earlier about the fact that, there's Australia and then we can pool our resources with other like-minded states, that is true, but it's getting increasingly less true as time goes on, because that pool that we can reach out to and collaborate with other countries is getting smaller and smaller and less capable over time. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that the Chinese are beating us. They've got their own internal problems. They've got, they've got economic problems. They've got demographic problems. The Chinese population is not as big as it once was.
It's shrinking, in fact. Shrinking.
It is. It is. And that will have an effect. I mean, we can't underestimate that. In the short term, it's scary. But in the medium to long term, China doesn't look as scary, say, in 10 years from now, because they will be facing the same problems as we are facing now.
Bless your heart, John. Thank you very much for your wisdom.
No worries. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for coming on the show. That's John Bruni from Sage International. Isn't he clever?
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.